My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye at my own dinner table and told me I wasn't half the woman her mother was. My son just sat there in silence, but my response made him turn completely pale and shatter a glass. They had no idea I knew their dirty little secret. My name is Estelle, and the last time I hosted a family dinner in my own home, the home my husband and I built over 40 years, my daughter-in-law told me I wasn't half the woman her mother was. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating, more potent than the rich aroma of the gumbo I had spent all day simmering. Honestly, Estelle, you're not even half the woman my mother is. Angela, my son's wife, said it with a casual sort of cruelty, a little smirk playing on her lips, as she pushed a piece of shrimp around her plate. The clinking of her fork against the porcelain was the only sound in the universe. A profound, deafening silence descended upon my dining room in Savannah, the kind of quiet that feels louder than a scream. My heart, which had been fluttering with the simple joy of having my family around my table, began to pound a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. My son, Leo, my only child, just stared down at his plate, his shoulders hunched. He didn't flinch, he didn't defend me, he just let the words twist into me like a knife. In that moment, watching him, I realized this wasn't an ambush, it was an execution. And I was the only one who didn't see it coming. That single sentence was meant to be a killing blow. It was designed to shatter the fragile peace I had fought so hard to maintain since my husband, Hector, passed away. For months, I had felt this undercurrent of disrespect from Angela, these little barbs and backhanded compliments that I'd brushed off as generational differences. I'd told myself she was just modern, direct. I'd made excuses because she was the woman my son loved, and a mother's love makes you an expert in the art of self-deception. But there was no deceiving myself now. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a declaration of war, delivered at my own table, over a meal I had cooked with hands worn from a lifetime of loving and giving. I looked across the table at her. Angela was the picture of modern success, dressed in a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. Her nails were perfectly manicured, her hair styled in a way that screamed expensive. She held herself with an air of bored superiority, as if gracing my old-fashioned home with her presence was a chore. And in her eyes I saw it clearly for the first time. Pure, unadulterated contempt. She didn't just think I was less than her mother. She believed I was less than her. I was a relic, a service provider, a quaint old woman in a house full of memories she saw only as dusty, outdated furniture. My gaze drifted to Leo, my boy, the child I had stayed up with through countless fevers, the one whose college tuition I had paid for by taking on extra sewing work until my fingers bled. He was now a man of 35, but in that moment, he looked like a guilty child, refusing to meet my eyes. His silence was his consent. His stillness was his agreement. It was a betrayal so profound it stole the air from my lungs. He was letting her do this. He was a willing accomplice to my humiliation. And as I sat there, frozen, with the weight of his silence pressing down on me, I wondered how many other conversations, how many other shared jokes at my expense, had led to this moment of supreme confidence from her. This wasn't a new thought for them. It was just the first time it had been said out loud. Have you ever felt that? When the words that aren't said cut you deeper than the ones that are. His refusal to speak for me was louder than her insult. It told me everything I needed to know. I was alone in this. The family I thought I had was a fantasy. The shock began to fade, replaced by something else. Something cold and clear and hard as steel. They thought they had broken me with one sentence. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. For a long moment, I just let her words hang there, letting my son absorb the full weight of his own cowardice. I watched the cruel satisfaction flicker in Angela's eyes, saw the way she glanced at Leo, a silent co-conspirator sharing in her victory. They thought I was going to cry, or shrink, or apologize for some imagined slight to her magnificent mother. For 70 years, my response to conflict had always been to smooth things over, to keep the peace at any cost. But the cost had become too high. The price was my soul, and I was no longer willing to pay it. I slowly placed my spoon down on the embroidered napkin, the silver making a soft, final clink against the china. I pushed my chair back from the dining table, the legs scraping against the heart pine floors my husband had installed himself. The sound was sharp, decisive, a full stop. Both their heads snapped towards me. I met Angela's gaze, holding it until she was the one who had to look away. My voice, when it came out, was not the trembling whisper they expected. It was calm. It was level. It was chillingly serene. "Well, Angela," I said, letting the name drip with a politeness that felt sharper than any insult. "If your mother is so truly magnificent, perhaps you should give her a call. She can start paying your rent." The silence that followed was entirely different. It was not the heavy, awkward silence of before. This was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Leo's head shot up, his eyes wide with the terror I hadn't seen since he was a child, afraid of the monster under his bed. "Rent? What rent?" he stammered, his face draining of all color. Angela's perfectly painted mouth fell open. The smugness vanished, replaced by a confused, ugly scowl. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice losing its elegant pitch and becoming shrill. "I'm talking about the rent, dear," I continued, my voice never wavering. "The $2,200 that gets debited from my bank account on the first of every month. The money that pays for your trendy downtown apartment with the rooftop pool. The money I've been sending for the last 8 months because my son, your husband, came to me crying that he was about to be evicted." I paused, letting the information sink in, watching the gears turn behind their eyes. Then, I delivered the final blow. "The money," I said, my voice dropping slightly, laced with the venom of a sacred promise being broken, "that I have been taking directly from the retirement fund your father left for me." Leo made a choked sound and shot up from his chair, so abruptly he knocked his water goblet over. Ice water and crystal shards sprayed across the polished mahogany table. "The retirement fund? Mom, no! What are you talking about?" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Voiceover. That was the moment everything shattered, quite literally. But the truth about the rent, as shocking as it was to them, was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the first crack in a dam of lies and deceit that was about to burst wide open. What they didn't know, as they stared at me in horror, was that their humiliation of me tonight wasn't the first move in this chess game. It was a checkmate they had foolishly walked right into, because I already knew everything. I had overheard their entire pathetic little plan the week before. In that second, when Angela had delivered her insult, I made a choice. I chose myself. I chose my dignity over their comfort. I decided I was done being the quiet, convenient, and easily discarded foundation of their lives. I'm curious, what was the moment in your life that you finally decided to choose yourself? For me, it was that quiet, terrible dinner. Leo looked at me, his eyes pleading for an explanation, for me to say it was all a misunderstanding. He had no idea the explanation would be so much worse than the accusation. He thought this was about money. It was about everything but. "You want an explanation, Leo?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but now it held the weight of memory, the sorrow of a promise I had been forced to break. "You want to talk about that fund? Then let's talk about promises." I looked at my son, this stranger with a face I knew better than my own, and the dining room in Savannah melted away. Instead, I was on my porch swing, a warm summer evening 2 years ago, Hector's hand, calloused and strong, holding mine. He was weaker then. The illness had already taken so much, but his eyes were clear. He was worried about me, about what I would do when he was gone. "Estelle," he'd said, his voice raspy but firm, "there's the life insurance, and the house is paid off. But I set something else aside for you, $75,000. It's not a fortune, but it's yours." He squeezed my hand. "This isn't for bills, Stell. It's not for emergencies. This is your Live a Little fund. I want you to take that trip to see the redwoods we always talked about. I want you to buy that expensive sewing machine you've had your eye on. I want you to live for yourself. For once. Promise me." And I had. Through tears, I had promised my dying husband that I would honor his final gift to me. That money wasn't just paper. It was his love made tangible. It was his last act of caring for me. It was sacred. 8 months ago, that sacred promise was shattered. Leo had shown up at my door, just after dark. He was a mess. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes were rumpled, and he put on the most convincing performance of a broken man I had ever seen. He told me a story about losing a huge client, about a temporary cash flow problem, about how he was just a few months away from landing a massive new contract that would fix everything. "I'll pay you back every penny, Mom, I swear," he'd sobbed, his head in his hands. I can't bear to tell Angela we might get evicted. The shame would kill her." Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. Hector had always said Leo was too soft, too eager to find the easy way out. But my heart, my mother's heart, saw only the little boy who used to run to me with a scraped knee. The primal instinct to soothe my child's pain overrode everything else. So, I did it. The next morning, I went to the bank, my hands trembling with guilt, and I set up the first transfer of $2,200. I felt Hector's disappointed eyes on me with every number I wrote. And the sacrifices began. That Live a Little fund became my Keep My Son's Lies Afloat fund. I stopped getting my expensive arthritis prescription refilled, telling myself the generic pills from the drugstore were good enough, even as my joints ached in the morning. The leak in the sunroom roof? I patched it myself with a bucket of tar instead of calling a professional. My grocery budget was slashed to the bone. I started eating chicken noodle soup for dinner 3 nights a week, telling myself it was nostalgic. I told myself it was my duty. It's a strange thing, a mother's love. It can be your greatest strength and your most profound weakness. I wonder how many of you watching have ever sacrificed a piece of your own dream for someone you love, hoping they'd appreciate it one day. I was sacrificing my husband's legacy, the one gift that was meant only for me, and for what? So they could continue going out to fancy dinners I saw pictures of on social media? So Angela could buy a new designer handbag? I saw the posts. I saw their life of brunches and weekend getaways, all while I was counting pennies, feeling the ghost of my husband's disappointment in every corner of this lonely house. I thought I was saving my son from a temporary crisis. It turns out, I was just funding my own destruction. I thought my sacrifice was a secret, a quiet burden I carried alone out of love. But it turned out, I wasn't the only one with secrets, and theirs was so much darker, so much more venomous than mine. The truth came to me a week before that final disastrous dinner. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the sweet smell of jasmine that grows wild in Savannah. I'd gone to their apartment to drop something off. It was a stupid, sentimental thing, really. I had found Leo's old childhood quilt in a cedar chest, the one my own mother had made for him, and I'd had it professionally cleaned. A mother's gesture. A small, pointless act of love. I took the elevator up to their floor in that sterile, modern building that always smelled faintly of bleach and air freshener. As I approached their door, number 4B, I could hear their voices. The door was slightly ajar, probably so their little designer dog could wander in and out onto the balcony. I raised my hand to knock, but Angela's voice, sharp and impatient, cut through the air and stopped me cold. "It's not working fast enough, Leo. The subtle hints aren't landing. She's too sentimental. We need to escalate." I froze, my knuckles hovering an inch from the wood. It felt wrong to listen, but some primal instinct, some long-dormant sense of self-preservation, kept me rooted to the spot. "I don't know, Angie." Leo's voice was weak, hesitant. It was the same voice he used as a boy when he was trying to get out of doing his chores. "She loves that house. Dad built the sunroom himself." "She loves you more," Angela snapped back, her voice dripping with condescension. "And if you would just play your cards right, if you would stop being so timid and actually make her feel like a lonely old woman rattling around in a big, expensive, dangerous house, if you make her feel like a burden, she'll do anything for her precious, only son. Don't be an idiot, Leo. That's a $450,000 house. We could pay off your debts, put a down payment on a place in a real city, and be set for life. All you have to do is make your mother feel guilty for having a life she can no longer handle." The quilt in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The neatly folded fabric, a testament to generations of love, felt like a fool's offering. I stood there in the silent, air-conditioned hallway, and the world narrowed to just their voices, plotting the emotional destruction of the woman who was funding their very existence. Every kind word I'd received, every forced smile, every hollow "we miss you, Mom," replayed in my mind, now tainted with the poison of their true intentions. It's a terrifying thing to realize the person you're trying to save is actually the one holding the knife. Tell me, have you ever had that gut-wrenching moment where you discovered someone's intentions were the complete opposite of what they showed you? My blood ran cold. I could feel a metallic taste of fury and betrayal on my tongue. They weren't just ungrateful. They were predators, and I was their prey. They saw my love not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. They saw my home not as a sanctuary of memories, but as a cash machine waiting to be cracked open. I didn't knock. I didn't make a sound. I backed away from the door as silently as a ghost, the quilt still clutched in my hand. I walked back to my car, my movements stiff and robotic. I got inside and sat there for a long time, staring at the sterile facade of their building. The tears I expected to come never did. In their place, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. The game had changed. They had written a script where I was the lonely, pathetic old mother who gives everything up for her children. But I wasn't going to play that part. I drove home that day, not as a victim, but as a woman with a plan of her own. The next time I saw them, it would be on my terms. It would be at my table, and I would serve them exactly what they deserved. The day of the dinner arrived, and I moved through my kitchen with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Every chop of the celery, every stir of the dark, rich roux for the gumbo, was a deliberate act. I wasn't just making dinner, I was preparing a battlefield. I set the table with my mother's wedding china and the heavy silver cutlery that Hector and I had received as a wedding gift. I wanted the stage to be perfect. I wanted to surround them with the weight of a history they were so eager to erase. When the doorbell rang, I took one last deep breath, smoothed the front of my apron, and composed my face into the warm, welcoming smile of the woman they thought they knew. They walked in, and the performance began. Angela was radiant in a dress the color of money, a fake, bright smile plastered on her face. "Estelle, the house smells divine," she said, air kissing the space beside my cheek. Leo followed her like a shadow, carrying a cheap bottle of wine and avoiding my eyes. "Hey, Mom," he mumbled, giving me a quick, awkward hug. I hugged him back, and for a moment, I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the love for the boy he once was. But it was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. I was no longer hugging my son. I was hugging a stranger who saw me as an obstacle. We sat down to eat, and the attack, cloaked in feigned concern, began almost immediately. "This gumbo is wonderful, Estelle," Angela began, laying the groundwork. "But honestly, I don't know how you have the energy for all this. This house, it has such wonderful bones, but the maintenance must be a nightmare for you all alone. All this dusting," she gestured vaguely at my polished mahogany buffet. I saw the words for what they were. Act 1, Scene 1, plant the seed of my own incompetence. "Oh, it's not so bad," I said with a cheerful, dismissive wave. "It keeps me busy." "Yeah, Mom, we worry about you," Leo chimed in right on cue. He looked at me with what he probably thought were concerned eyes, but I could see the hollowness behind them. A slip on these old stairs, you know. It's a big place for one person. There it was, my dutiful son, playing the role of the concerned child, a role he had rehearsed. It was like watching a play where I had already read the script. Every line they spoke was predictable, every motive laid bare. It's a strange and lonely feeling, isn't it, when you become an audience member to your own life? "Don't be morbid, Leo," Angela said, lightly tapping his arm before turning back to me, her eyes gleaming with predatory helpfulness. "My mother's friend just moved into the Sandpiper Villas down in Florida. It's just gorgeous. They have a golf course, a pool, healthcare right on site, all the modern conveniences. Takes all the worry away for the kids." Act 2, present the perfect solution, the gilded cage she had picked out for me. I simply smiled and nodded, spooning more rice into Leo's bowl. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my voice dripping with a sincerity that was utterly false. "But I'm quite happy here. This house holds all my best memories." Her smile tightened. My contentment was an inconvenience to her plan. I could see the frustration building behind her eyes. They had expected me to be sad, lonely, overwhelmed. They had come here to find a fragile old woman they could gently nudge into a cage. Instead, they found a woman content in her own home. My quiet strength was ruining their script. I watched Angela take a deep sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. The subtle approach had failed. It was time for a more direct assault. She thought she had me. She thought I was just a sentimental old fool, easily broken. She decided it was time to deliver the final, crushing blow. And I just let her. Angela stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. Her carefully constructed facade of elegance had shattered into a million pieces. The color had drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, blotchy mask of disbelief. Leo, meanwhile, was frantically trying to do damage control, his hands flapping uselessly at his sides. "Mom, wait, it's not what you think," he stammered, his eyes darting between me and the damning evidence of the spilled water glass on the table. "I was going to pay you back. It was a temporary thing. You're twisting this." I held up a hand, and the sheer force of the gesture silenced him. "You think this is about the money I've been sending you?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Oh, Leo, this is about so much more than your rent." I turned my full attention to Angela, whose panicked eyes were now locked on mine. "I was at your apartment last Tuesday, Angela. Around noon. I came to drop off a quilt for Leo." I let the detail hang in the air, watching her process it, watching the flicker of memory and the dawn of pure horror on her face. The door was open, and I heard everything. Her gasp was sharp and ragged. The last bit of color drained from her cheeks. "I heard your little plan," I continued, my voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "I heard you call me a sentimental old woman. I heard you outline your brilliant strategy to your husband on how to make me feel like a burden in my own home. I heard you talk about how I was rattling around in this big, dangerous house. And then I heard you put a price tag on my life's memories, on the home my husband built for me. $450,000, wasn't it? That was the number you seemed so fond of." That's a lie," Angela whispered, but the words had no conviction. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "You're making that up. You're just an angry, bitter old woman." "Am I?" I asked, taking a step toward her. "Am I bitter? Or am I just finally seeing clearly? To you, I wasn't a person anymore, was I? I wasn't Hector's wife or Leo's mother. I was a roadblock sitting on an asset, a problem to be managed." The truth of it felt ugly and profane in my beautiful dining room, a room that had seen so much love and laughter. It's a chilling realization when you understand that to someone you love, you've become nothing more than a number on a balance sheet. It makes me wonder, have you ever felt that horrible shift when you realize a relationship isn't about love anymore, but about what you can provide? I let the question hang in the toxic air between us. "So when you sat here, at my table, eating my food, and told me with that cruel little smile that I wasn't half the woman your mother is, it wasn't just a random insult, was it, dear? It was a tactic. It was part of the plan. It was meant to break me down, to chip away at my confidence, to make me feel small and worthless and incompetent. You were trying to make me believe I couldn't handle my own life, so that I would gratefully hand the keys over to you." I looked from her terrified face to my son's completely broken one. Angela was speechless, her pathetic plan laid bare for the fraud it was. But I wasn't done. This went deeper than her greed. I turned to my son, my only child, who was now just a crumpled, weeping man at my dinner table. "The rent, Leo. The temporary problem. It's more than that, isn't it? I've heard her plan. Now I want to hear your truth. It's time for the real story." All the fight went out of Leo in an instant. My question, the demand for the real story, didn't just corner him, it broke him. He collapsed back into his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook with ragged, pathetic sobs. Angela looked at him with pure disgust, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Oh, stop it, Leo," she hissed. "Don't be a baby." But I just watched him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I waited. I had all the time in the world. Finally, he looked up, his face blotchy and streaked with tears. "It wasn't just a lost client, Mom," he whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. "It was more than that. The pressure, You don't understand the pressure. Angela likes nice things, a certain lifestyle. I was supposed to provide that. At work, I was falling behind on my sales quotas. I was desperate. He took a shaky breath. So I fudged the numbers. I inflated some figures on a report, just to make the quarter look better. I thought I could fix it the next month, but my boss found out. They called it performance fraud. They fired me. That was 6 months ago. The confession hung in the air, ugly and stark. Fired for fraud. My son, a cheat. But as I watched him, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this still wasn't the whole story. This was just the lie he told himself to make the real truth more palatable. And? I prompted, my voice flat, leaving him no room to hide. His eyes flickered toward Angela, then back to me. And there were debts, he stammered, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear it. From online, poker. It started small, you know. Just a way to unwind after a stressful day. A few hundred here and there. But I lost. So I chased it. I kept thinking the next big win would fix everything. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a desperate pleading self-pity. It's $15,000, Mom. I owe $15,000. If I thought the room was silent before, it was nothing compared to the dead, absolute stillness that followed that number. Then Angela exploded. Gambling? She shrieked, her voice an octave higher than I'd ever heard it. $15,000? Are you kidding me? She turned on him, her face a mask of pure fury. You told me you lost a client, you pathetic, sniveling liar. You let me sit here and orchestrate this entire humiliating drama with your mother over her house, when all along you were just trying to get money to pay off some online bookie? The pieces were clicking into place for her, and she was horrified by the picture they formed. She hadn't been a partner in a scheme for a better future. She had been a pawn in covering up his sordid secret addiction. I looked at my son, at this man I had created, and I realized this disaster didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one bad decision. It was 1,000 small ones. It was built brick by brick, with every small lie I ignored over the years, every excuse I made for him, every time I rescued him from the consequences of his own actions. It's a hard question to ask ourselves, but have you ever enabled someone you love by refusing to see the truth that was right in front of you? I had. I had enabled this. They screamed at each other then, a hurricane of accusations and blame. Her fury versus his pathetic excuses. It was raw, and it was ugly. I watched the life they had built together, a life funded by my sacrifice and built on his lies, implode right before my eyes. They were two selfish, broken people trapped in a prison of their own making. And in the midst of their chaos, as they tore each other apart, my own path became perfectly, terribly clear. This wasn't just about cutting off an allowance anymore. This was about severing a legacy. Enough. The word was not loud, but it cut through their shrill, ugly argument like a shard of glass. Both Leo and Angela stopped mid-sentence, turning to look at me as if they had forgotten I was even in the room. The fury and panic on their faces slowly subsided, replaced by a dawning dread as they took in my expression. There was no anger left in me. There was no sadness. There was only a profound, quiet finality. I walked over to the mantelpiece, the one Hector had built from reclaimed heart pine, and picked up our wedding photograph. A young man and woman, full of dreams, staring into a future they thought they understood. Your father and I didn't have much when we started, I said, my voice soft, speaking more to the memory in the frame than to the two strangers at my table. This house, the money in the bank, the little bit of savings we scraped together over 40 years, it was never just stuff to us. It was supposed to be a testament to a life of hard work, of waking up before dawn, of honesty, of loving each other through good times and bad. It was our legacy. I placed the photo back down, carefully, before turning to face them. An inheritance isn't a prize you win, Leo. It's not a lottery ticket. It is the final, most sacred act of trust a parent places in their child. It's a quiet prayer that the values you spent a lifetime building will be honored, that the love you cultivated will be respected, that the name you built will be carried on with dignity. My eyes met my son's, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He just absorbed the full weight of his failure. You haven't just lied about money, I said, my voice steady. You have desecrated your father's memory. You have proven, beyond any doubt, that you cannot be trusted with that responsibility. You would squander it all on backroom poker games and a life built on deceit. Then, I looked at Angela. And you, I said, you see this family's legacy as nothing but a piggy bank to be smashed open. You walked into this home, a home built on love, with a heart full of nothing but greed and contempt. You have shown no respect, no kindness, and no understanding of what it means to be family. You have no claim to any of it. An inheritance of character is worth more than a house full of gold. But what do you do when the person you're meant to pass it to has rejected every value you hold dear? It's a painful question, but I'd like to know what you think. Is a parent's final obligation to their child's financial future, or to the principles they built their life on? I took a deep breath. This was the final step, the point of no return. My lawyer's name is David Chen. His office is downtown on Broughton Street. I have an appointment with him this coming Monday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp. At that time, the will that names you, Leo, as the sole beneficiary of my estate, this house, the savings, Hector's retirement fund, everything will be rendered null and void. I will be drafting a new one. The finality of it hit them. This wasn't a threat shouted in anger. This was a calm, logistical statement of fact. It was happening. Leo made a small, wounded sound in the back of his throat. Angela just stared, her face a blank canvas of shock, the gears in her mind furiously calculating the magnitude of what she had just lost. They had overplayed their hand and, in a single evening, had lost everything. The house, the monthly allowance, and any hope of a future inheritance. They had come to my home to secure their financial future. Instead, they had witnessed its complete and utter annihilation. I believe, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument, that you both know where the door is. I suggest you use it. They didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. Angela, her face a stony mask of fury, grabbed her ludicrously expensive purse from the entryway table. She didn't look at me, and she didn't look at Leo. She simply walked to the front door, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the floorboards, and let herself out without a backward glance. Leo lingered for a moment, a pathetic, broken figure in the middle of my dining room. He opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg, but no sound came out. He just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime of his emotional collapse, and followed his wife out into the humid Savannah night. The front door clicked shut, and the silence they left behind was the loudest I had ever heard. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I sank into my chair, the rich smell of the gumbo I had so lovingly prepared now turning my stomach. The beautiful table setting, the gleaming silver, the pristine china, it all looked like a cruel joke, the backdrop for a tragedy. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. A profound, hollow grief washed over me. I wasn't grieving the son and daughter-in-law who had just walked out my door. They were strangers to me. I was grieving the family I thought I had. I was mourning the little boy who held my hand at the park, the young man I had proudly watched graduate from college, and the happy, loving future I had always envisioned. That family, I realized, had died long before tonight. I had just been the last one to find out. I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks, but in a town like Savannah, you don't always need to. I knew the first of the month would come and go, and that my transfer of $2,200 would not be made. Later, I heard from a neighbor of theirs that an eviction notice had been taped to their glossy black door. The foundation of their life, built on my money and his lies, had crumbled, and then came the final, inevitable implosion. I can only imagine the scene, played out in that apartment they were about to lose. Angela, with her designer suitcases packed, her face stripped of all pretense, finally showing Leo the mercenary I had seen glimpses of all along. I can hear her voice, dripping with venom. I didn't sign up for this, Leo. I didn't sign up to be married to a broke, lying gambler who gets disinherited by his own mother. My mother warned me about you, about your weakness. I should have listened. Their marriage, it turned out, was as hollow as their promises. It was a partnership of convenience, and when the convenience ran out, so did the loyalty. It really makes you think about the foundation of our own relationships, doesn't it? Are they built on the rock of mutual respect, or on the sand of mutual benefit? She left him, just like that. She called her magnificent mother, who I'm sure was more than happy to pay for a one-way ticket to anywhere but here. She walked away from the mess, taking no responsibility for the role she played in creating it, leaving my son alone in an empty apartment with an eviction notice, a mountain of debt, and the full weight of his catastrophic failures pressing down on him. He had lost his wife, his home, and his mother's trust, all in a matter of weeks. He was at the absolute bottom of a hole he had spent years digging for himself. The only question left was whether he would try to climb out or let the darkness swallow him whole. For the first month, the silence was absolute. I kept my Monday morning appointment with my lawyer, David Chen, and formally changed my will. The act was somber, not triumphant. It felt like a funeral for the future I had once imagined. I went about my days, tending to my garden, sewing, trying to find a new rhythm in a life that felt both emptier and, strangely, lighter. I didn't know what had become of Leo, and a part of me was terrified to find out. I imagined him on the streets, or worse. Every night I fought the maternal urge to call him, to find him, to fix it. But I knew, with a certainty that was as painful as it was clear, that my fixing was what had broken him in the first place. Then, about 6 weeks after that dinner, I heard a whisper. It was from my friend Maria at the grocery store. "Estelle," she said, her voice hesitant. I think I saw your Leo last night. He's washing dishes over at the Oglethorpe Diner." My heart seized. The Oglethorpe Diner was an old, greasy spoon place open 24/7, a world away from the fancy restaurants he and Angela used to frequent. I thanked Maria, my face a calm mask, but my mind was reeling. I learned the full story later, pieced together from different sources. After Angela left, Leo had stayed in that apartment until the marshals put a lock on the door. With no money and no one to call, he spent 3 nights sleeping in his beat-up Honda Civic, parked in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I imagine him there, in the oppressive heat of a Savannah summer, surrounded by the debris of his old life, a stray golf shirt, an old invoice from a client he'd lied about. It was there, in that humid, lonely darkness, that he finally hit the unforgiving concrete of rock bottom. He sold his car for a few $1,000s, just enough to rent a tiny, grim room in a boarding house downtown and buy a few meals. Then he did something I never thought he would do. He walked into the Oglethorpe Diner and asked for a job. Any job. They put him in the back, in front of a mountain of greasy plates, with hot steam and the smell of stale coffee as his constant companions. The man who once wore tailored suits was now earning minimum wage, his hands raw from scalding water and harsh soap. But that wasn't the most important step he took. One Thursday night he walked into the basement of St. Michael's Church and sat in the back of a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. For the first time in his life, surrounded by strangers, he said the words out loud, "My name is Leo, and I have a problem." He started a journey not just to pay off his debts, but to understand the weakness that had led him there. He was finally, painfully, starting to take responsibility. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. To know my child was suffering, and to do nothing. To not drive to that diner. To not send him a check. To not rescue him from the consequences he had earned. But I was finally learning that sometimes, true love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go so they can learn to stand on their own. I think that's a struggle many of us face, so I want to ask you, when is it right to help, and when does help become a hindrance to someone's growth? For me, the answer had become painfully clear. I knew he was safe, at least for now, safe from the chaos he had created, and in letting him go, I had unintentionally given myself a gift: freedom. The freedom to finally look beyond being Leo's mother and ask a question I hadn't asked in 40 years. What about Estelle? With the constant draining weight of Leo's problems lifted from my shoulders, my house began to feel different. The silence was no longer heavy with grief or tension. It was peaceful. It was a blank canvas. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I woke up in the morning, and the first person I thought about was myself. The question I'd ended with weeks ago echoed in my mind. What about Estelle? I had no idea how to even begin to answer that. For 40 years, I had been Hector's wife and then Leo's mother. The identity of Estelle was a faded photograph from a life I barely remembered. One rainy Saturday, I decided it was time. I pulled the old cedar chest from the top of my closet, the one filled with Hector's things that I hadn't had the heart to go through. The scent of cedar and old memories washed over me as I lifted the lid. Inside were his favorite sweaters, his worn leather-bound books, and a small tied bundle of letters. They were the condolence cards I had received after he passed, letters I had been too numb with grief to open at the time. I untied the ribbon and began to read through the generic, well-meaning sympathies. But then I found them. 3 thick, cream-colored envelopes with a return address from Asheville, North Carolina. The handwriting was elegant and familiar. Julian. Julian had been our friend in college, Hector's roommate and my confidant. The three of us had been inseparable for a time. He was brilliant and kind, a budding botanist who saw the world in shades of green. He'd moved away to pursue his doctorate, and as life happens, we'd lost touch. I opened the first letter, written a week after Hector's death. It wasn't a simple condolence. It was a beautiful, heartfelt tribute to the man he had known, filled with shared memories and inside jokes that made me smile through my tears. He wrote about Hector's laugh, his integrity, his unwavering loyalty, and then he wrote about me. He remembered the dress I wore to a college dance, the way I would argue with our professors, the passion I had for classic literature. He saw me, Estelle, not just the grieving widow. For the first time in forever, I was doing something that wasn't for my son, or for the memory of my husband. It was just for me. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that, where you knew you had to take a small step into the unknown just to feel alive again? I found his number online through the university, where he was now a professor emeritus. My hand trembled as I dialed. "Hello?" A warm, deep voice answered. "Julian?" I asked, my own voice a nervous squeak. It's Estelle. Estelle Miller." There was a pause, and then a soft, incredulous laugh. "Estelle? My goodness. After all these years, your voice, it sounds exactly the same." "Oh, I doubt that, Julian." I laughed, a genuine rusty laugh that felt like it came from another person. "It's got a few more miles on it now." We talked for over an hour. It was the easiest conversation I'd had in a decade. We talked about Hector. We talked about his own wife, Clara, who had passed away from cancer 4 years prior. We talked about our lives, the quiet joys and the deep sorrows. He told me about his work, about the rare mountain laurels he cultivated in the gardens near his home in Asheville. He painted a picture of a world so different from my humid, memory-soaked life in Savannah, a world of crisp mountain air, rolling blue hills, and quiet purpose. Before we hung up, he made a simple offer. "Estelle," he said, his voice gentle, "I know it's a lot to ask, but if you ever want to just get away, to see something different, you should come visit Asheville. There's no pressure, just a friend, a spare room, and some beautiful mountains to look at." I hung up the phone, a smile on my face that felt both foreign and familiar. For years, my world had been shrinking, closing in around me. Now, for the first time, it felt like it might be about to expand. I went to my computer, my hands still trembling slightly, and I bought a round-trip ticket to Asheville, North Carolina. The bus ride from Savannah to Asheville was a journey through more than just miles of pine forests and rolling hills. It was a journey out of the life I had known. With every mile that passed, I felt the heavy, humid air of my past being replaced by something lighter, cooler, and filled with a terrifying and wonderful sense of possibility. I watched the familiar landscape of the low country give way to the gentle inclines of the Piedmont, and finally, to the majestic, hazy blue peaks of the Appalachian Mountains. I was a 70-year-old woman on a bus, with a small suitcase, and no idea what to expect, and I hadn't felt so alive in decades. He was waiting for me right where he said he would be, standing by the entrance of the bus station. He was older, of course. His hair was a shock of silver, and the lean young man I remembered now had the gentle, settled frame of a life well lived. But his eyes were exactly the same kind, intelligent, and crinkling at the corners as he broke into a wide, genuine smile. He wasn't holding a big bouquet of flowers, but a single, perfect wildflower, a Queen Anne's lace, which felt so much more like the Julian I remembered. There was a moment of awkward hesitation, the chasm of 40 years standing between us, and then he just opened his arms and gave me a warm, comfortable hug. "Estelle," he said, his voice full of a simple, uncomplicated warmth. "I'm so glad you came." The days that followed were like stepping into a different world. Julian's home was a small, rustic cottage nestled on the side of a mountain, with a wide porch that looked out over a valley that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was different here. It was clean and crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was a place of profound peace. We spent our time in the quietest, most wonderful way. We took long, slow walks through the North Carolina Arboretum, where he would point out the different species of ferns and rhododendrons, his voice filled with a contagious passion for the living world around us. He didn't treat me like a fragile old woman. He treated me like an intellectual equal, someone with a mind capable of curiosity and wonder. We would spend evenings on his porch, wrapped in old quilts, drinking tea as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and deep purple. We didn't spend much time dwelling on the past or our grief. Instead, we talked about books we'd read, about the state of the world, about the simple joy of a perfectly ripe tomato from his garden. He listened to me, truly listened. He asked for my opinions on things, and he remembered the little details I told him. For the first time in years, I felt like a fascinating person, not just a collection of roles I played for other people. I was not a mother to be managed or a widow to be pitied. I was Estelle. Sitting there one evening, with the mountains turning to silhouettes in the twilight, I realized I wasn't performing for anyone. I was just being. And I was being seen for who I was. It's amazing how the simple act of being truly heard by another person can feel like coming home to yourself. It makes me curious to ask you all, who is the person in your life that makes you feel the most like your true self? He had, in the gentlest way possible, reminded me of the woman I had been before. Life had worn me down into someone I no longer recognized. My laughter, which had been a rare and rusty thing, started to come more easily. My world, which had been confined to the four walls of my lonely house, had expanded to encompass the entire Blue Ridge mountain range. For the first time in years, I felt perfectly, completely at peace. I had found a quiet joy I thought was lost to me forever. I had no idea that this newfound peace was about to face its first real test. I was on Julian's porch, a book lying open in my lap, watching a family of bluebirds flit between the bird feeder and the dogwood tree. The peace was so complete, so profound, that when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I recognized with a jolt, it felt like a stone thrown into a perfectly still lake. It was Leo. My breath caught in my throat. For 2 months, there had been nothing. Julian, sensing the sudden tension in me, gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and then quietly went inside, giving me privacy. My hand trembled as I answered. "Hello? Mom?" His voice was different, thinner somehow, and stripped of the whining, manipulative edge I had become so accustomed to. It was just quiet. "It's Leo. I know you have no reason to want to talk to me, but I'm calling because I have to. It's part of my program. I'm on step 9, making amends." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not asking for anything. Not for money, not for you to change your mind. I have to say I'm sorry." I listened, my heart pounding a cautious, wary rhythm. The old Estelle would have burst into tears, would have said, "Oh baby, of course I forgive you," and the cycle would have started all over again. But that Estelle was gone, replaced by the woman sitting on this mountain porch, a woman who had learned the hard way that love without boundaries is a form of self-destruction. "I'm listening, Leo," I said, my voice calm and even. And he talked. For 10 minutes, he laid the whole, ugly truth bare, without a single excuse. He apologized for lying about his job, for the fraud he'd committed. He apologized for his gambling addiction, for the mountain of debt he'd hidden from everyone. He apologized for taking the money from Hector's fund, acknowledging that he had stolen not just my money, but my husband's legacy. And then his voice cracked. "And I'm so sorry, Mom, for what I let happen at that dinner, for letting Angela talk to you that way. for my silence. It was cowardly, and it was cruel, and there is no excuse for it. I failed you as a son." The sincerity in his voice was a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still so raw. The apology was real. I could feel it. But I also knew that words, no matter how sincere, were easy. Actions were hard. "I hear you, Leo," I said when he was finished. "And I appreciate those words more than you know. Forgiveness, it's a complicated thing. It isn't a switch I can just flip. It's not about erasing what happened." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But what I can give you is my hope. I hope you continue on this path. I hope you keep going to your meetings. I hope you continue to choose honesty, day after day. Prove it. Don't prove it to me. Prove it to yourself. And then, maybe, we can talk about rebuilding what was broken." Hanging up the phone, I realized that true forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it and refusing to let it define your future. It's not about saying what you did was okay. It's about saying what you did will no longer have power over me. And that's something I think we all struggle with. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What does forgiveness really mean to you? A new idea began to form in my mind, clear and strong. It was an answer to the dilemma of the will. I didn't want to abandon my son completely, but I could never go back to enabling him. There was a third path, a wiser path. I told Julian about my idea. Not a handout, but a hand up. A formal trust, set up in Hector's name, that would be strictly controlled. It wouldn't pay for his rent or his lifestyle, but it could pay for tuition if he decided to go back to school, or cover the cost of his therapy and recovery programs. A fund to support his growth, not his dependency. He listened, and when I was done, he simply said, "That's the wisest, most loving thing I've ever heard." And I knew in my soul it was the right path. It was time to redefine what a legacy truly meant. My trip to Asheville had been a breath of fresh mountain air, but my return to Savannah was what truly solidified my new resolve. As I walked back into my house, the house I had once fought so fiercely to protect, it felt different. The memories were still there, sweet and comforting, but they were no longer chains binding me to the past. The house was no longer a fortress to be defended. It was an asset, a choice, a key to a future I was now actively building for myself. The following week, I made another appointment with my lawyer, David Chen. The first time I had sat in his plush leather office chair, I had been fueled by a righteous, cleansing anger. This time, I was filled with a quiet, constructive purpose. "David," I began, laying out my notes on his polished desk, "I want to amend the changes we made to my will and my estate. I don't want to disinherit my son completely. I want to redefine his inheritance." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out my plan for the Hector Fund. It wouldn't be a simple trust he could access at will. It would be an irrevocable trust, managed by a neutral third party from David's firm, so I would never again be put in the position of being the gatekeeper to his finances. The terms were ironclad. The fund, seeded with a significant portion from the sale of my house, would never provide cash handouts. It would not pay for his rent, his bills, or any semblance of a lifestyle. Instead, it would pay directly to institutions for very specific purposes. Tuition for a vocational school or community college, should he decide to learn a real trade. The costs of his certified therapy and Gamblers Anonymous program materials. And finally, upon the successful completion of a degree or certification program and a full year of clean living, the trust would release a small, one-time stipend to help him secure a deposit on a modest apartment. It was a roadmap to recovery, not a safety net for failure. David sat back, looking at me with a new kind of respect in his eyes. "Estelle," he said, "in 30 years of practicing law, this is one of the most well-thought-out, compassionate, and frankly, brilliant estate plans I have ever seen." His validation was comforting, but I already knew in my heart it was the right thing to do. The old me would have just given Leo the money and prayed he wouldn't squander it. But that wasn't love. I saw that now. That was fear. Fear of his pain, fear of his anger, fear of losing him for good. This new way was harder, but it was built on real love. It was the kind of love that says, "I believe you have the strength to do this yourself, and here are some tools to help you build, not a cushion to keep you from falling." It was one of the most difficult and liberating decisions of my life, to stop giving my son what he wanted, and instead to offer him a chance at what he truly needed. It's a fine line to walk in any relationship, isn't it? How do you distinguish between supporting someone and simply enabling their worst instincts? For me, the answer had become to support the potential, not the problem. That afternoon, I also signed the papers to list my house for sale. Walking through the rooms one last time, I didn't feel the sadness I had anticipated. I felt gratitude for the life Hector and I had built there, and a profound sense of peace in letting it go. The house had served its purpose. Now, its value would serve a new one, to fund my new beginning in the mountains, and to give my son a chance to earn his. I wrote him a letter that evening, explaining the Hector Fund, its strict terms, and its purpose. I didn't present it as a gift, but as a challenge. The ball was in his court now. The choice to use those tools, the choice to truly rebuild his life, was his and his alone. 6 months passed, 6 months of quiet, steady change. I sold the house in Savannah, a process that was more cathartic than sad, and officially moved into my new, smaller life in Asheville with Julian. We spent our days gardening, hiking the mountain trails, and reading by the fire. It was a life of simple, profound peace. I had sent the letter to Leo explaining the Hector Fund, and then I had let it go. It was a message in a bottle cast into the sea. I had no idea if it had been received or what it would mean to him if it was. True to my promise, I did not interfere. I waited. Then, one crisp autumn morning, he called. His voice on the phone was so different from the last time that it startled me. It wasn't the broken whisper of a man confessing his sins. It was the calm, grounded voice of an adult. "Mom," he said, "I got the letter. I've been processing it. I'm in Asheville for the day. I was wondering if I could buy you a cup of coffee, just to talk." He suggested a small, neutral coffee shop at the foot of the mountain, and his thoughtfulness in not wanting to intrude on my new home spoke volumes. I saw him through the window before I walked in. He looked older. He was thinner, and his hands, wrapped around a coffee mug, were the hands of someone who worked, with rough knuckles and clean, short-filed nails. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple flannel shirt and jeans. But it was his eyes that were the most changed. The old, haunted, shifty look was gone. For the first time since he was a boy, his eyes were clear. I sat down opposite him, a nervous flutter in my stomach. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I've read your letter 100 times. At first I was just stunned, but the more I read it, the more I understood. It wasn't a punishment, Mom. It was a roadmap." He told me about his life over the past 6 months. He was still working at the diner, but he'd been promoted to a line cook. He was still attending his GA meetings 3 times a week, and he was about to become a sponsor for a newcomer. And 2 months ago, he had used the first disbursement from the Hector Fund to enroll in an online accounting certification program at the local community college. "I'm not great at it yet," he said with a small, wry smile. "But for the first time in my life, I'm earning something honestly." He reached across the table, not to take my hand, but just to let his rest on the table, a gesture of openness. "I used to be so angry at you that night. I felt like you were abandoning me. But now I see the truth." He looked me straight in the eye, and the words that came next were the ones that finally, fully, healed my heart. "You saved my life, Mom. You saved it by refusing to save me. Thank you for cutting me off. Thank you for letting me hit the bottom. Thank you for finally letting me grow up." A wave of emotion so powerful it took my breath away washed over me. It wasn't the old, painful ache of worry. It was a quiet, steady pride. I could see his father in him then, in the line of his jaw, in the integrity that was finally taking root in his soul. We didn't have a big, tearful Hollywood hug. I simply reached out and placed my hand over his. A mother and a son, 2 adults, equals. We were building something new, something honest, something earned. It wasn't the relationship I had dreamed of when he was a child, but it was something better. It was real. It proves that it's never too late to change, and that sometimes the most broken things can be rebuilt into something even stronger. And that's the thought I want to leave you with. What broken thing in your life right now is worth the hard work of rebuilding? As I drove back up the mountain that evening, I didn't feel the old, familiar anxiety for my son. I felt a deep, abiding peace. Our story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours. And for the first time, it felt like it was going to have a happy ending after all. As I write this, sitting on my porch with the Blue Ridge Mountains painted in the soft hues of late afternoon, I often think about that terrible night. It feels like a scene from another woman's life. Julian is humming to himself in the garden, tending to his prize-winning azaleas, and the only sound is the gentle breeze rustling through the pines. The humiliation I felt at that dinner table was the most painful moment of my life, but it was also a gift. It was the catalyst that forced me to wake up, to reclaim my own story. It was the poison that, ironically, held the antidote to the quiet unhappiness I had accepted as my fate. Leo and I talk every Sunday. The conversations are calm, honest, and full of a quiet respect we never had before. He is set to finish his accounting certificate in the spring. He's still working at the diner, and for the first time, he is proud of the work he does, of the life he is building for himself, one honest day at a time. He is dating a kind schoolteacher who, he told me, loves him for the man he is becoming, not the man he pretended to be. As for Angela, I heard through the grapevine that she quickly married a wealthy retiree in Florida. I hold no ill will towards her. In a way, I am grateful. Her cruelty was the shocking jolt I needed. I learned that a legacy isn't something you leave behind in a will, it's something you live every day. I learned that self-love isn't selfish, but the very foundation of a life well lived. And I learned, most importantly, that it is never, ever too late to start over. That night, when Angela told me I wasn't half the woman her mother was, she was right. I was a shadow of myself. But now I am whole. I am not a mother, a widow, or a victim. I am Estelle, and my second chance at happiness was waiting for me all along. I just had to find the courage to take it.